Well, good evening, everyone. During the last year and a half or so that we have been coming together, some of us frequently and some new, here for talking about different issues about the Baha'i faith. Some of us are Baha'is and some of us are investigating and curious about the Baha'i faith. I thought that it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about how one becomes a Baha'i and how one lives a Baha'i life. This is something that requires quite a bit of reflection and thinking. At least it has required a lot of reflection and thinking on my part. And I thought that it would be a good idea to share some of those issues with the friends here, and hopefully you would share also, and gradually we become more knowledgeable about this very mysterious process. Because the site of faith, the place of faith, is the human heart. It is the human heart that connects with the divine, with God, with divinity. And human heart is not only the site of human emotions, but it is the core of being human being. It is the very core of our being, the essence of our being. It is through our heart that we understand, that we know, and that we love. And it is really, in a sense, heart is another name for the soul or the spirit. The heart is not just what usually people talk about, separating the heart and the brain and so forth. They are the very core of our being. And therefore it involves all our faculties, emotional faculties, intellectual faculties, decision-making faculties. And that's where our relationship with the divine and the covenant with the divine takes place. Now, a very interesting phenomenon in the Baha'i faith is that nobody is born Baha'i. Some people are born in Baha'i families, but nobody automatically is a Baha'i because he or she has been born in the Baha'i family. That's not true about other religions. By far, the majority of religious people in the world, people who call themselves Muslims or Christians or Jews or Hindus or whatever, they are born in that milieu. And they adopt the norms and way of thinking and the worldview of their parents and of their community and their environment. And as they grow up, some of them become very religious. Some of them become just marginally religious. For example, in the Christian world, some become really very, very religious. Others go to church once a week. Others go to church only on Christmas. Others, they just simply say we are Christians, but they don't pay much attention. They don't know anything about it. And others, although they are in a Christian culture, they don't believe, and they are agnostic. They call them, I'm an agnostic Christian, or I'm not a Christian, or whatever. It's just things evolve that way. It's not anything systematic of how one adopts a faith. It's not that. So this is a very unique dimension of the Baha'i faith, is that you are not born a Baha'i. You have to become a Baha'i. And the ways that people become Baha'i is very different. If we go, for example, to the history of the Baha'i faith, we go on 23rd of May, 1844, where the Baha'i era began. And that night, in the city of Shiraz, a young man, a student of religion, who had concluded from his studies that the promised one of Islam is coming, and he has to go and find the promised one. His name was Hossain, the name of the person who was searching. So he prepares himself for search. How does he prepare himself for search? He decides that he would go into seclusion for 40 days. Prayers and fasting, connecting himself with God, asking that he be guided, asking that he be shown the way. And he somehow in his heart is inspired to go from Iraq, where he was at that time, to Iran, to city of Shiraz. So he goes there. And as he arrives there, he is met by a young man who invites him to come to his home. So Hossain goes with this young man to his home, and he is received in the most refined Persian ways. He is helped to wash and to clean himself and to get ready, and they sit and they start conversation over refreshment. And the host says, why you're here? And he says, well, after our spiritual teacher died, he had told us that after he is dead, we should spread around and look for the promised one. And I have come to Shiraz, hoping that I find the promised one. And the host says, and what are you looking for? And Hossain has had studied, and he had a lot of issues, signs and questions and so forth, that he wanted to present to the person that proclaimed to be promised one, in order to make sure that indeed that was the right person. So he started talking about those things. And to make the story short, after a number of hours, it was the evening and went overnight. By morning, Hossain had realized that the promised one was his host, the Bab. In the Baha'i history, he's known as the Bab, the gate. And he was the promised one of Islam. Okay? Promised one of Islam. And all Muslims have been waiting for him. And still they are waiting for him to come. Still they are waiting. And Mullah Hossain, the first person to believe in the Bab, was told that 17 other individuals are going to find the Bab through their own search. And together they would constitute 18 people called the Letters of Living. Okay? So he was told not to tell anybody anything. So the Hossain goes back with his friends in Caravanserai, which is the classical Middle Eastern ancient hotels. And he's calm. And his friend, a very prominent friend of his, by the name of Ali from Bastam, sees him and said, "Why you're sitting here? Why you're not searching?" And Hossain just smiles. He said, "Well, you have found him. Who is he?" And he said, "Well, I cannot tell you. You have to find him yourself." Okay. So what does he do? Ali goes to a period of intense prayer and meditation. And after several days, he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees the young man whom he has saw once in Iraq, in the classroom of his deceased teacher. And he realizes that that is the promised one. So he goes to Hossain and says, "That's him." And then Hossain takes him to the Bab. Another of the Letters of Living is a woman, the only woman in the group. She never met the Bab. She never met the Bab, but she knew that the Bab was the promised one and was in the Shiraz in her heart. So she wrote a poem and gave it to one of her relatives that also was searching for the promised one, and said, "When you find the promised one, give the letter to him." And the letter was that I accept that you are the promised one. The last of the Letters of Living was a 22-year-old man who came from north of Iran to Shiraz in search of the promised one. And he arrived In Shiraz, when you enter Shiraz, there is a arch over the road. It's called the Gate of the Quran. Quran, the holy book of Islam. This gate, on the top of it, has a huge Quran in a secure case. And the Quran is put there because according to the Islamic tradition, if you want to go on a journey and you want your journey to be safe, you have to go under a Quran. So I remember in Iran when we were traveling, our Muslim family members, they would put the Quran over your head and you go under it so you're protected. So in Shiraz, they made it easy. They created a gate and put the Quran there. So anybody who goes in and comes out is blessed automatically. Okay? Which is nice. Okay? Which is nice. You know, I walked several times and did that because wanted to be blessed, you know, multiples of times. So, Qudus, the last one, he enters Shiraz. As you go, there is a bend, and you bend, and as soon as you go around the bend and come under the gate, the whole panorama of Shiraz is open before you. It's just a beautiful sight because it's a higher level and you see everything. And as he was walking, he saw this man walking, the young man, and he said, that's the promised one. From the gate, from his gate, walking, seeing his gate, the way he was walking. He said, it's promised. Okay? Now, as you see, here we have 4 different ways of accepting a manifestation of God. One was through logic and reason and science and questioning. One was through a dream. One knew to her heart and wrote a poem and said, yes, I accept. And one through the way that the person was walking. He said, well, that's obvious. That's the promise. Okay? These are all mysterious ways. And they are the ways of the heart and the ways of the mind. They are the ways of logic and reasoning, as well as the mysterious ways, the mystic way. They're all like that. And if you go and look into history of how people have become Baha'is, you will see these different notes repeat themselves over and over and over. In my family, I'll give you a little bit of personal history. The way my family became Baha'i was very interesting. My father's father, my grandfather, was a religious leader in a small town. Okay? A small town which was on the slopes of Shirkuh, the mountain of Lion, in Yazd. And on Shirkuh there were 2 small communities. One was called Banadak, and the other one called Manshad. Manshad had many, many Baha'is. Banadak had many, many very devoted Muslims. And they were always at odds with each other. Okay. And my grandfather was the mullah for Banadak. Okay, he was the mullah for Banadak. And like all clergy, he lived the life of clergy. And the Manshadi Baha'is decided that he's a good man and they should introduce him to the Baha'i faith. So they managed through whatever way to engage him in a search, in the process of a search. And my father, who was the second son of his father of 7 siblings, began to notice something funny. He noticed that they had a house that had 3 stories. Okay, I was there many years ago. I don't know what happened to it now. And the first story and second story were the living areas. The first was kitchen and eating area and so forth. The second was the bedrooms. And then there was one room on the top, 3rd floor, that was the exclusive site place for the father. He would go there and he would do his studies and would prepare his sermons, and nobody would go there. Okay, that was his room. And my father began to notice that many nights, around 12 midnight, the light comes on. And night after night, he will see the lights is on. So he becomes curious. So he goes and looks through the keyhole to see what's going on. And he sees that his father and a couple of other men sitting around and reading some book. And they're talking with each other. And they do that for 2-3 hours. And then quietly they close the book, put it, and father would put it in his, he had a special box and he would lock it. And then they would go quietly and the father goes to sleep. So my father decides that, okay, he has to find out what this is all about. So he goes and breaks the lock. Yeah, breaks the lock and takes the book out, and is one of the most renowned Baha'i books, the Book of Certitude. The Book of Certitude is the one of the writings of Baha'u'llah about the nature of religion and the dynamics of progressive religion and how religion comes to humanity and so forth. So my father started reading that and so forth and talked with his father, and his father said, quiet. And then he said, yeah, I have become Baha'i, but I haven't announced it. But as you notice, my sermons have changed. And father had noticed the sermons changed. So my father and his father, the two of them, become secretly Baha'is. Okay. Because if it was open, they would be killed. Okay. That's simple as that. And then something unfortunate happens, and my grandfather falls from rooftop and is killed. He dies. And my father was very young at that time, in his late teens, early 20s. And so he decided to leave, and he goes. And he goes to a small town of province of Yazd, called Ardekan. So my father became Baha'i through reading the Book of Certitude and discussing and investigating it and understanding it. So it was an actual process of search and reflection. Baha'u'llah said that we have to investigate the truth independently. You see, and he did that, and here it was. Okay. Yeah, okay, he broke the lock, but otherwise everything was okay. Everything was kosher. Then my father was in Ardekan, and he got a job as a tax collector. Now, tax collectors in Iran were very powerful and very hated. They were powerful because they could demand money from people, and they were hated because they were demanding money from people. Okay, so it's a very simple process. Okay, but my father was famous for being the most honest tax collector in the area. They never have had a tax collector that was honest and was fair. So he had made a name of his own. And then he decides that he wants to get married. And he was a Baha'i, and he was going to Baha'i events. And there was a family there that he liked one of their daughters, and he decided that he wanted to get married. So, but at that time, he didn't have any family member, and he had to send somebody to go and propose. So he went to a professional marriage, what you call it? Matchmaker, like eHarmony or, that thing that you have here. So he went to his matchmaker, to the matchmaker, and said, I want to get married. And he said, okay. He said, I want to marry the daughter of Sadr. Matchmaker said, okay. I go and mention it to them, see what happens. He goes, and a few days later comes back and said, good news. So yeah, he said, they have accepted. They organized the wedding, and my father put his best clothes on, and with the matchmaker started walking towards the home of the bride. And they were going the wrong way. He said, where are we going? He said, going to the home of the Sadr. And it suddenly dawned on my father, it's the wrong Sadr. There were two Sadrs there were two Sadrs in Ardekan. One was the Baha'i Sadr family, and the other one was very renowned and powerful non-Baha'i family. He was Sadrul Ulama, very, very famous family. And the brother of the Sadrul Ulama actually was one of the most virulent opponents of the Baha'i faith. And he had ordered martyrdom of a number of Baha'is in earlier times. So suddenly, you're walking to Sadrul Ulama's home for getting married. My father has a moment of reflection and says, okay, what am I going to do here? And he decides that, okay, it's the will of God. Let's go see what happens. So they go. They go, and he gets married into the family of Sadr. At that time, there were no Baha'i marriages, and they were all Islamic marriages. And my mother and father, they get married, and they start living together. And my mother's family were very aristocratic and very, she had been raised not learning anything about how to cook or how to take care of household or anything like that. But she had been, unlike other girls in the Iranian society, he had been tutored, and she could read and she could write, and she had knowledge of mathematics and so forth, so she was knowledgeable. And they had a good life until my mother notices that my father approximately once every 3 weeks disappears at night. He disappears at night and comes home very late. And my mother begins to see, okay, what's going on? This is not right. So she immediately thinks what is happening in Islamic society, that the father has another wife. Immediately, that's natural. They can have up to 4 permanent wives and as many temporary wives as possible. So why not? Why not? So she logically thinks, okay, that's it. So she decides to spy on him to see what's going on. And lo and behold, she sees that he comes back from one of his late nights, goes to one of the rooms in the house, opens a box, puts something in the box, locks it, and puts it there. So what do you think would happen? My mother goes the following day and breaks the lock. There is justice in this one. It's a family practice. Yeah, the family pattern. Breaks the lock, and there is a book there. And she picks up the book, and she opens it, and as she opens it, there is a photo in the book. And the picture is a picture of a man that she had seen in her dream at age 11 when she was on pilgrimage to holy shrines of Islam in Iraq. And the dream was that she dreamt that she was sleeping in her room. Her room had 2 doors. And this figure of this man came to the room, looked at her, smiled at her, and went out. That was it. But she never had forgotten the smile and that encounter, the way he looked at her and smiled at her. And every time she thought of that, she would be full of joy. And she opens the book, which was, by the way, a book of certitude, opens the book, and the first thing that she sees is this picture. So she goes to my father and says, who is that? And my father tells her, and so forth. And then she started studying and she becomes a Baha'i. Okay? Isn't that interesting? The way you are guided toward. My parents were married all their lives until my father died in a car accident, and my mother died 2 years ago in Toronto. Devout, totally devoted to the faith. And it started that way for each of them in a very different way. Now, as I mentioned to you, my mother needed help raising children, okay, because she hadn't been taught about this kind of things. So when I was born as their first child of the family of 7 siblings, we had a nanny. I had a nanny whom I was very, very attached to. And under the influence of nanny, I grew up to be a very devout Muslim. She was a Muslim. And my mother still hadn't become a Baha'i, hadn't discovered that thing. Later, she did. And so I was a very fanatic Muslim when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I was so fanatic that I wouldn't eat with my parents because I considered them unclean because they were Baha'is. You see, I was fanatic. I would say my prayers and this and that and so forth, and they didn't bother. They said, okay, you want to be that way, you know. And then when I was about 13 or 14, and I loved reading. And we were living in a small town. I had no money. There was no public library. And the only books that were in the house were Baha'i books, plus a couple of books of poetry and history and philosophy. So I started reading just out of curiosity. And the more I read, the more it made sense. I read the history, I read different books, the different reasons and so forth, and it just suddenly things began to make sense, began to change, began to make want to look at the world and everything differently. And by age 14 and a half, 15, I was definitely a Baha'i. You know, I joined and declared myself and became a part of the community. But it was a period of 2 years of really systematically looking at the issue of religion. You know, when you live in a society that is imbued with religion, and the society I was living at that time was imbued with religion. Every aspect of people's life was mixed with religion. Religion was not another one aspect of your life. It was the main framework of your life. Everything that you did it within that. We live in a materialistic society now, so religion is just on the sideline, okay? Other issues are in the forefront. But in the Iranian environment that I was living at that time, and even now when you go to a Muslim country, you will see religion is the central issue. If you go to a Hindu society or a Jewish society, you will see the religion is at the core. That shapes your life. But in the West, things have evolved towards more of a secular process. But anyway, the process of here you have 3 generations of people becoming Baha'i in one family, each of them in a different way. Each of them having, one has a dream, the other one searches, the other one and reads and studies and argues and so forth. He said, every one of them is different. Because each of us have a unique relationship with the divine. And it is so essential that we focus on that relationship, that make sure that our relationship with the divine, with God, with the source of our creation, is not neglected. That we focus on it, we reflect on it, we make sure that the bonds of the relationship become stronger and stronger and stronger. That's why in the Baha'i faith, for example, when you become a Baha'i, you make sure that your everyday life is organized in such a way that connection with the divine, with God, with the manifestation of God, is strengthened. So you are advised to at the dawn time to pray with God, to say prayers, to read from the writings. That consider what you do during the course of the day as an act of worship. And if it is an act of worship, you have to do it through process of excellence. You have to do process of full attention to what you do. It is so fundamental that whatever we do it right, and we do it in the spirit of service. In the writings of the Baha'i faith, and this is specifically the writings of the Bab, he says that everything has its heaven. You know, for example, this microphone has its heaven, and the heaven of the microphone is when the microphone works perfectly. So it reaches its level of paradise, heaven, okay? Every human being has to constantly put himself or herself in the condition of heaven, meaning search for excellence and try to move towards excellence. And excellence is a very curious phenomenon because it has no limits. Doesn't matter how excellent you become, you are not totally excellent, okay? Fully excellent. There is no limit in excellence in human being. And because there is no limit in excellence in human being, our approach to achieving excellence has to be systematic, has to be thoughtful, has to be reasonable, has to be orderly, has to be in such a way that allows you to evolve on an ongoing basis. Abdul Baha says that the sign of a Baha'i, being a Baha'i, is that every day our life is a little bit better than the next day. Not that we suddenly become perfect individual, because that's impossible. Not that we become perfect on an ongoing basis, in a short period of time. That's impossible. You know, perfection means continuous effort, knowing that you never reach it. Okay, knowing that you never reach it. Therefore, pursuit of perfection is different from being perfectionist. Perfectionist says, I have to be perfect or else. Or this has to be perfect or not. When we are perfectionists, we never are satisfied. with what we do or with other people do. You're never satisfied. Okay? When you pursue perfection, you're always satisfied. Because you do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, you know. If Armand was a perfectionist, wouldn't be able to play the way he's playing. But because he pursues perfection, every time he's a little bit better, little bit better, little bit better. That's the process of a spiritual development also. The process of a spiritual development also is a gradual process, is a systematic process, is orderly process, and is a reasonable process, not unreasonable. As soon as it becomes unreasonable, when faith and issues of faith become unreasonable, we become fanatics. Fanaticism is when we take the issues of faith beyond reason and make it unreasonable. Okay? And reason in every sense of the word, both in our order and in our efforts, as well as in our reasoning and logical thinking. Yeah, you know, to be reasonable means we have to be logical, and fanaticism is illogical. It's illogical, you see. So therefore the life becomes a blueprint of the life for a Baha'i becomes a life of an ongoing expansion of consciousness, ongoing attempt at bringing one's thoughts, feelings, and actions in harmony with each other. And an ongoing process of being an emblem of unity. Because the ultimate paradise of human beings is when we are united. We have unity within ourselves, unity with other people, and we are agents of unity in the society at large. That's the ultimate. That's the paradise. For human beings, the paradise is a state of unity. Inner unity, interpersonal unity, intergroup unity, marital unity, family unity, unity of thoughts, feelings, and actions, unity of objectives and what we pursue and how we pursue it. These are all different expressions of the law of unity. And in the process, we bring our actions in harmony, in unity with the spiritual principles. We don't become one with God, but we bring our will in harmony with the teachings of the revelation. That's a different process, you see. So the whole process of becoming a Baha'i is at once a mysterious process and is a very thoughtful, orderly process. And doesn't matter from which angle you come in, you have to bring the other angle in also. So it becomes complete, it becomes whole, you know. And then, like any other phenomena in life, we will be constantly tested. It is impossible to evolve, to grow, to develop without being tested. We always have to be tested. Tests come our way. So our faith also begins to be tested. You see, we cannot just go and say, okay, I'm Baha'i and that's it. No. You are a Baha'i and I am a Baha'i and I have to live a Baha'i life. And as I try to understand how to live Baha'i life and try to live a Baha'i life, I'm going to be tested. I'll give you an example. When I finished my medical school in Iran, decided to go for specialization to United States. So I went to United States to specialize in psychiatry. And when you study psychiatry, the first thing that you notice is that the views about human nature are very materialistic. All the books and textbooks and everything that you read basically describes human beings as being the byproduct of evolutionary process, of the biochemistry of the brain, of the hormonal conditions of the body, of the environmental situations in which you live, you grow up. You don't have an independence of your own. You don't have a reality independent from evolution and biology and environment and so forth. Okay. So in essence, at best, you are an advanced animal. Okay, at best, you're an advanced animal. And not only that, everything about you, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you interact, the way you dream, everything is analyzed and understood within framework of biological processes of gratification and sexuality and power and power domination and those kind of things. And then all these gurus of human behavior scientists describing human beings in a very, very materialistic and negative terms. So when I started studying psychiatry, everything that I was studying was exactly the opposite of the teachings of the Baha'i faith about human nature. What human nature is, how it evolves, how it develops, everything you would study was exactly the opposite. So what you do, okay? And many young Baha'is face this in their universities because what they study in their different disciplines that they go on, doesn't matter what discipline they go. If you go the economics, and they teach them about theories of capitalism, and that human nature by human beings are by nature greedy, and that the source of capitalism is the human greed. And the more greedy you are, the more successful you are going to be. That kind of nonsense. They are put in the cloth of science, so-called science, and are given to people. And as soon as you say something that is about the spiritual human nature, they attack you and they consider you as totally ignorant, and you really have rough time with the professors and with university crowds and so forth. And you become a pariah, you become an outsider, you become object of derision. That's what happens. That's what's happening every day in universities and so forth. So being a Baha'i means that in the academic circles, you have to now become a pioneer of a new way of thinking. And being a pioneer takes enormous amount of courage. It takes courage, it takes wisdom, it takes tact. How am I going to deal with this situation that the principles that I understand and I have studied and I have accepted as to be truthful with respect to a spiritual reality of human being are not neglected and put aside in order for me to agree with Freud or Darwin or this person or that person. This becomes a great challenge, and it is a good challenge because ultimately, in this world, when you look around, you will see that the world is in extremely difficult situation. The world of humanity is in a state of crisis. The world of humanity is as such that peoples of the world are suffering profoundly because of the disunity that exists in this world and misunderstanding of what is human nature and what is the purpose of life. And the Baha'is are a very small number of people, and they are totally on the periphery. But the world of humanity is going to be tested and is going to go through trouble after trouble after trouble. Governments are going to go through crisis. We see it in Canada, we see it in the United States, we see it all over the world. Economic systems are going to go through crisis. Human relationships are going to be going through crisis. All the human developments and sciences that we develop and technologies are going to be abused. The way that, for example, right now, internet is being abused, or all the technology are being abused. So the world of humanity is in one of the most dangerous times of its existence. And we have to begin to introduce the Baha'i thought into every area of human endeavor. And that's what makes us revolutionary. Put it differently, as Baha'is, we have to be willing to be abnormal. Normal is, you know how the normal is right now in the world, okay? And Baha'is are abnormal, okay? And we have to have the courage of standing up for our abnormality and defend it and show why our abnormality is true normality. This is the challenge. Whether it is your place of work, place of study, the type of work you do, everything makes Baha'is abnormal. In other words, they don't behave and act according to most of the practices that are contrary to the spirit and text of the teachings of the faith. So these are some thoughts that I had about the process of becoming Baha'i and being Baha'i. I have explained it more in one of the chapters in this book, but I just thought that I share with you some thoughts along those lines.